So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're listening from. Welcome. I'm Indra Adnan, and I am the co-creator of the Alternative UK, the political platform that asks the question, if politics is broken, what's the alternative? I'm also a member of the LIFT platform, Leadership for Transition in Europe, and part of the series, one of the main interviewers of the series, Pioneers of Politics, in which we take a very broad view of what we mean by politics, no longer meaning party politics or the old system of simply parties opposing each other or challenging each other for dominance, but a new kind of idea of politics. Where does our agency lie as human beings in the 21st century? And it's my huge pleasure today to introduce to you André Anderson, who has been leading a project called Freedom and Balance. And if you can imagine those two words appearing in my stratosphere for the first time, you'll know that I was very drawn to interviewing André as soon as possible. But just a tiny bit of background, just a sort of anecdote really as to where we met, because that in itself is interesting. We met at an event at Civic Square, which is a project in Birmingham, which is a cosmo-local community agency network run by Imi Kaur. And I think some of you have seen the work that Imi is doing in these circles already. But on this particular day, she had invited Kate Raworth, who's the author of Donut Economics, to run an experimental workshop on the new economy. What is the new economy or the next economy that we're trying to give rise to here? And she was devising a game, how can we play our way into the next economies? So, and André was there and I was there, and I'd never met André. And we kept finding ourselves in this really uncomfortable role of playing the game according to the rules and finding ourselves in a very privileged position of amassing the same amount of points and being in charge of something that we didn't really want to be in charge of necessarily. But it was amusing, and it just gave me a tiny window into wanting to know more about André's work. And so with that very modest introduction, André, I'd like you to then introduce our audience to what you do, what you've been doing, and really anything you want to say about yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm André. I'm a headmaster of an art college called Freedom and Balance. And the tagline is that it's an art college for the artists and everyone. So our goal is to figure out how we can take art and creative thinking and something that has been very exclusive for a very long time and make it something more communal and something that a language that people figure out how to speak. So I'm an artist by trade. I've done poetry and graphic design and photography and self-publishing and all that kind of stuff. And I found it really interesting, but I guess with every artist, you do a lot of this stuff in seclusion and by yourself. And I've always had a vision of my artistic practice in its fullest sense with people around me. And not just with people around me, like in a very solemn room, but really enjoying what they're doing, really engaging with it. And the people that I had in my head are people that currently aren't artists or see themselves as artists. So I've created Freedom and Balance for myself, a place for me to play and grow as an artist, but also as well to almost open source some of the creative thinking for others to find their own creative language as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's great, thank you. And so I love this idea that you're a headmaster, because instantly I think of you in a new way. So, perhaps could you explain a little bit more about the thinking behind the headmaster and the school and who the pupils might be? What is the structure that you're giving rise to there?
So with the headmaster thing, I've always wanted to create a creative environment for possibilities to happen. But if you call yourself a creativity possibility designer, no one really knows what you're talking about. So I'm very big on metaphorical thinking and getting people to understand almost intangible concepts with concrete things that they understand. So I really am into education, and the thing that I am trying to build is a learning environment So I started to say, right, you know what, let me say that I'm building a college. College, actually, the root meaning of the word college means community. So essentially, the word community and college are actually interchangeable. And the reason why I called myself a headmaster and not a creative director is because it just kind of leads to the idea that like I'm leading an educational journey and I'm the one that's kind of figuring it out. But it does frustrate a lot of people, especially people who are in traditional education and people who are aiming to be headmasters. What I'm doing is not quite what they're doing or want to do. So I kind of see what we're doing as a genre of education, and I'm a genre of headmaster. That's what I'm trying to carve out for myself. So kind of what it looks like is that we have a team of Freedom and Balance is a faculty of four of us, and we essentially figure out what would be an interesting way for people to express themselves, get closer to a community, but also have fun at the same time. And then we then put out our version of a term, which is what we call seasons, and it's a call out for people who are experienced artists and also people who just wants to have a cool Thursday with some people. And we essentially have these sessions that allow people to express themselves, and they could dip in and out. They could be as committed as they want to for that space of the season. It's not like a commitment where it's like once you're here, you have to be here for the whole season. And that's essentially how we work. We try to create seasons throughout the year, and I'm now trying to figure out how you can do it in such a way where you really do build not just an artist, but a art culture that we haven't necessarily seen before. So that's essentially what our practice looks like on a day-to-day.
So I feel quite I feel very energized just listening to you, but also I feel moved because it's always been something at the heart of the idea of a new civilization, within which a new politics has to arise, that it should have that kind of the idea, people's creativity at the core of it. And not only that, but also a good feeling, the ontology, if you like, of this idea that we should feel different in the process of being learners. So it's a natural and free environment for learning, and there's no doubt. What I welcome about the headmaster idea is that you're saying, you can't avoid it. You have to learn. We're in an era of needing to learn something to get ourselves to this next level.
And I think also as well, I think that because we have to learn at such a consistent rate, it's not like when you're in your, I don't know, up to your teens or maybe your early 20s, you do enough learning to kind of last you a stable career for the rest of your life. We are now heavily unstable, and we have to keep learning new skills and new ways of thinking and learning all that kind of stuff. And weirdly enough, I'm a contradictory individual, because I didn't really like education like that. I actually never went to university on purpose. I didn't like the idea of how it was structured, and that's probably why I wanted to design my own school. But I think that my issue is, and the thing that I'm trying to figure out, we still haven't got there yet. Are we going to be doing this for the rest of our life? If we've moved from traditional like university to workshops, are we going to be just doing workshops for the rest of our life? Is that our portion? Is that the new thing that we're doing? Because it's not fun. Like, it's cool after like a couple of weeks, but then when you're doing this for years, you're like, it's school again, right? So how do we reform it in a way where it's enjoyable, and almost as enjoyable as something you would do as a pastime? You go into a club, or you play in a sport, or you hanging out with your friends. How can you learn seriously and have the development that you need to as a human being, or in whatever capacity you want to be in, but then also is what it feels as enjoyable as other places, rather than here's fun and now here's the learning time. Why are they separate things? So
Yeah.
figuring that out is very important for me, because that's going to determine how long I do this for. I don't want to keep running workshops as it currently is.
Yeah, and it's a great challenge, and I hope that a lot of the people who are in our circles are taking that challenge on with you, because I completely see how easy it is to get trapped by the old system, even while you're trying to make the new system.
Yeah.
You know, the same for me with politics. I did the same metaphorical thing as you did, and call myself a politician.
Yeah.
You know, and we have badges that say, you know, I'm a politician, to anyone who wants to take on the issue of power and agency in our world, the society we live in, and also our personal worlds. You know, how am I being political about my life? But then the divides, anyway, they appear.
Yeah.
Because when you're doing something different, then you still have the old system and the new system, and you sort of trying to replace what happened in the old system with the new system.
Yeah, but the fight is kind of fun though. Like, the fight is necessary; it has to be there regardless. But I think there's something. I was speaking to a friend the other day who, like me, is involved in social change and stuff like that. And we were speaking about this idea of like a paradise where we don't have to do any of this kind of work. And I was saying, like, I don't know if I would fit in that world. Like, I'm the adjutant. Like, my whole way of thinking is to look at how something works and like, oh, but we could do this, we could do that. So I feel like there's something painful, but there's also something quite enjoyable about that tension of there being a stable structure, and then you just poking at the holes for you to, like, essentially you care about the structure enough for it to like grow out, and it grow out in a more healthy way.
Yeah.
For more people and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting, I think sometimes, especially when you're an artist or a change maker or whatever, we have this narrative of we have this utopia narrative, whether we say it vocally or not, where nothing is going wrong. But that's not our practice. That's not even what we enjoy about our practice. It's like, it's very interesting that we gravitate to that story when there's actually more interesting stories to follow, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I used to have a complaint that I was an outsider, and that I was always an outsider, and it was partly to do with coming from, you know, I emigrated from Holland and my father's from Indonesia, and so when I came to this, I felt like an outsider. But over the decades, I should say, I noticed that whenever I became an insider, I would move to the edge of that circle again, to be an outsider, because ultimately that was my comfort zone. Is to be the person who doesn't want to ever be, it sounds a little bit like what you're describing, in a stable situation. And maybe that's to do with character, or maybe that's to do with capacity for being constantly,
it's temperament.
You know, maybe it's a playful thing to always want to be transforming wherever you are and moving to the next, imagining the next step, you know?
Yeah, because you have the same way how you have an ecosystem in nature and amongst animals and insects, where every insect has a certain thing that they are definitely doing, but it adds towards a bigger picture. We also have people who are really much focused on, like, I just want to annoy. Like my thing is an adjutant. I am the adjutant, and I'm happy that we have in every generation one or two major adjutants. That's like, why are you doing this? But like, they end up shaping the ecosystem in a way that sometimes is overall helpful. It's a very dangerous role to play. Like, some people can tip things on the other side of the scale. But the reason why I'm saying this is because I believe that everyone is creative, but there's also varying desires to be creative and varying capacities to be creative. So we don't need everyone to be Michael Jackson. We only need one Michael Jackson a generation. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, not everyone needs to be I don't even know if I want to be in a world where everyone's like that. And it makes me understand that especially when it comes to world changing again, my vision as an artist has been everyone become an amazing artist. Everyone becomes amazing thinkers and all that kind of stuff. Bearing in mind that the reason why I'm able to do what I'm doing in the way that I'm doing it is I'm surrounded by very, very stable structures. So I'm the ad lib. I'm the person who like riffs off of what's already there. So I feel like there's a responsibility for us to allow people to figure out how much they want to engage in being a change maker, right? Not everyone's Martin Luther King. Like, not everyone's gonna be like putting their all into something. But for us to know the levels, for us to know the gauges is important, because I feel like we're the ones who always want to be on the edge of something, right? Or at least close to it. But when I'm running my workshops, when I'm speaking with people, I'm understanding that not everybody wants to run their own college, which is what that was my that was my dream for everyone. I thought everyone wanted to do this, but now I'm realizing that like my desire to do this is not a unique one, but it's one that's very I don't know what the word is, but it's something that is very particular to a small amount of people. So yeah, figuring out what that gauge is, I think, is important.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't know if you're familiar with integral thinking, but like Ken Wilber, a lot of the people on this who will be listening to this, the leadership in transition is really based on integral thinking. And it says more or less what you're saying, that there are many different forms of agency. And you know, you can't, your goal can't be, well, if your goal is to try to make everybody the same, you'll spend your lifetime being frustrated with that. You know, and then you won't have the diversity of agency anyway, because you know, even as we're being born and grow up, we go through these levels of agency, and then when we're adults, we maintain all these levels within ourselves, and we operate from different parts of ourselves. I mean, there are parts of me that are really activist, and there's another part of me that is a homemaker and quite a different mindset, if you like, and they clash formally, but informally they don't clash at all.
And
because I can be that sometimes, and I can be something else sometimes.
They feed into it. This is maybe awkward to say, but like when my art gets better the more I focus on my relationships outside of art. So like when I'm with my relationships, the richer that gets, the more language I have when I'm writing, or the more language I have, the more colors I see. Do you know what I mean? The opposite way as well, like, and sometimes that's beneficial too. But there are different parts of me, and they are in complement to each other, even though they're different parts of me. There's a part of me that's very communal, and there's a part of me that's very antisocial, and actually they actually complement each other. Do you know what I mean? It gives me boundary. And I think that's the same thing on a wider scale. Our agency is enhanced when we collaborate with other people's agencies, right? Like, not everybody's going to be lateral thinkers, and actually being able to be with some literal thinkers helps me to be a better lateral thinker. It allows me to understand how creative can I be with the resources we have, rather than assuming that there's ultimate resources. So I think that I don't know if we fully understand or truly understand the idea of diversity yet. Because oftentimes when we speak about diversity, we speak about oftentimes it's to do with gender or race, or often those two things, but not necessarily like I can only do what I do because I am from Brent. Like, I can only think the way I think because I am from Northwest London and I have these experiences and I'm of Jamaican descent. Only someone with these touch points can speak like this. And not only that, there is something that is enhanced when my voice is in unison or in harmony with another voice. There's a whole new sound that wouldn't have been created in any other way. I almost feel like when we speak about diversity and people collaborating together, it's almost like it's not a nice to have, but like, we should do this because we should be good people and bring people together, rather than seeing that we are actually broke and we're in poverty because we actually don't know the combinations that haven't yet been made. We don't see the true value of it, rather than like doing this makes us good people. So I do feel like there's loads of philosophical things that are kind of blocking us from us being able to see the possibilities that can actually be done in our culture.
Yeah, I mean, I just like to sit with that for a bit, because I feel this. I feel the same. And this idea of diversity that you're describing, and the way that you might learn about that outside of your practice, you know, as all these multiple kind of forms of intelligence, you know, intelligence meaning just other people's experience from other places, feeding into the mix, is going to give you more colors to work with. It's exactly what I feel. And that's the joy, in a way, of moving into the new space in the future, is to have so much more input than before, simply because more input is more colors. You know, and you're going to make a more beautiful work of art out of that.
I mean, like, even if you look at permaculture as a metaphor, like permaculture is like, how do you build yourself a farm whereby every plant kind of like benefits from each other existing, right? Like everything is interconnected. Those who are in agriculture understand the importance of diversity. They understand the importance of edges, and what grows on the edges, even waste, and how waste is important. The weather and how certain seasons help deteriorate some things, but also help other things grow. Everything is useful, and everything is celebrated in a way, and everything is interconnected. And I feel like we don't yet know we haven't got that agricultural language in the social space yet for us to truly understand the benefit of things. We do in theory, like, but I feel like it's at a very elementary level right now.
I want to go off in two directions at once, but let me go slightly backwards, and then we'll go forwards. Right, and the slightly backwards part of it is, even as we're saying, and I'm completely hearing you about the biodiversity discussion, you know, and permaculture, and I can think already of people I would love to connect you with who are doing that part of the work, and would really appreciate your narrative here, to be able to make what they're doing, give what they're doing new language that has more agency in it. Let's park that for a second. I'm going backwards, meaning when we think about the diversity of people, I can't help but also think about how many people are trapped in a certain kind of agency because of their circumstances, not because of who they are. So, you know, the vast majority of people who are trapped in, you know, mechanical jobs, and they're being force-fed a certain kind of food, literally using the wrong energy. I mean, everything about their lives is constricted because of the 20th century, you know, growth economy. I mean, literally, they are the creatures of that, and they're still there as slaves to that system. I'm talking about people everywhere. Maybe even the majority of people. When I think about the majority of people, and you know, and I see how I'm in part of that every day, you know, when I'm struggling with food and energy and time, you know, and here's a book that I really recommend called The Entangled Activist. Anthea Lawson talks a lot about all of these different conditions. There's also, you know, a sense of not just, you know, like, I don't want to, I nearly said the word rescue there, but obviously we're not rescuing, but, you know, creating conditions for people to move out of that trappedness, where they can't help but have limited agency, because, you know, they are, you know, the system has trapped them there. And so when you say to them, you don't need to be an artist, you're holding that as a principle of diversity, which I absolutely acknowledge. I also think about the people who would who can't think about being an artist because the circumstances certainly just won't let them.
Yeah.
It's just not real. They've got to
Yeah.
work 10 hours a day, sometimes and several jobs. They've got
Yeah.
families to look after. They're addicted literally to sugar, alcohol, meat, all the stuff, all the addictions, which is required by this economy. I mean, from that point of view, how do we attract people even to the idea that maybe, possibly, there is a creative person, even so, within them? How do we reach that person to want to even to develop the desire to have a creative life?
Yeah. Well, I'm from there, so like that's where I'm from. That's where I'm speaking from right now. St. Raphael's estate, where I'm based at, is well, at the time it was one of the poorest areas in well, definitely in London. I don't know about the UK. And kind of like one of my the project that kind of kicked off Freedom and Balance is Authors of the Estate. That is essentially, the idea of it is how do you turn a council house into a publishing house? And we've done it in 2 estates: my estate, which is St. Raphael's, and then up the road you have another one called Chalk Hill, which is under the same kind of conditions. And what essentially we were doing is that we were having conversations that are like conversations we're having now, and then those ended up being transcribed. Whether it was like we met face to face and we spoke, or they wrote their conversation after a couple of questions we asked them through WhatsApp. We tried to create a process that fit around them and their timing. And it's not to say that everyone there was like super like they had 5 jobs going on and they had no money and all that kind of stuff, but the overall economic like situation we're in isn't the best one. And we essentially created these 2 volumes of books that yes, it has our personal stories, and yes, it in a way documents Northwest London history in a way that we haven't had before. I mean, like 50 years from now, these books are going to be Northwest London history. But we also now introduced a new word into our language, which is authorship. People weren't really necessarily calling themselves authors or authorities of their own story, and we was able to introduce that. And it was so that's the kind of work that can be done. But to say that everyone still has to pay bills and things are still tough, and like nothing's necessarily changed economically or whatever, it creates but it does create a level of life that is important for an area. The I was speaking to my one of my friends, Nabil, who actually is actually the reason why the second Authors of the Estate exists, and he's very much into property and just development, like the development in the area. And like I'll say, like your thing is very much like hard power, but like soft power is as important, as far as like culture and the people, the home that is in the house is as important as the house itself. So what I am doing is not the answer, but it's an important contribution for people to be able to get themselves together, because it's very easy for soft power and hard power to look like they're in opposition to each other. But I said to Nabil, if you was to go straight into just hard power, and we'll be as violent as the oppression that's come our way, right? Because we're just focused on property and money and accumulation and wealth and all that stuff. And equally, if you just focus straight on soft power, you're having a great time, but also as well, how much of a great time can you have when like the wars are getting closer and closer in? So I do feel like, again, diversity of skill sets and interests is so important for people to fight different, take on different parts of the battlefield. My interest is the cultural part. I don't know anything about property. I just know that what we created brought up a conversation about development and property in our area that we weren't really having before. So yeah, I think that like I agree with what you're saying. There's people who literally do not have time to make stuff, and that's kind of what we kind of build everything we've done around that. Authors of the Estate, as a matter, I'll give you a perfect example. Authors of the Estate is based off of one word. So if you was to read the book, you wouldn't know that it was based off of one word. But when we went to everyone, we said, listen, the word is change. How do you respond to this word change? And you could write as much or as little as you want. And there was multiple ways that you can write. So you can either write something, you could write it on WhatsApp, you could chat to me and we could transcribe it. That is essentially how we write it. But then also as well, we had different level. We didn't tell anyone this, but we had different levels of author. So everyone's an author, but there's a level 1, level 2, level 3 author. Level 1 is someone that you just speak to on the road and they said one sentence and that ends up in the book. So you're like, cool, you're an author now. Number 2 is someone who took the time out to write a chapter. And level 3 would be someone like Nabil, who wasn't just writing a chapter, but was also bringing people together and help market the book and sell it and all of that kind of stuff. There's different capacities now. So it's not to say that in these kind of areas, change is absolutely impossible. It's thinking about what are the types of things that need to be changed. And then it takes so much thought as to what is the smallest unit of change that exists. And then how can we propagate this as often as possible? Yeah.
I mean, that's what I call a fractal approach.
Right.
So you do this, it's just really how a pattern of things comes together, and then it can be copied and replicated, and all of that, and that changes. But it's really exciting what you're describing, Andre, and that really is an answer to the question that I was asking. And quite often it can't be answered. So many people get stymied, at the point where they are not recognizing that their own question comes from such a privileged place.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, I almost feel like, I think that's something that kind of frustrates me, going back to the idea of workshops. That's something that kind of frustrates me, because going back to what you were saying about the person that has no time, again, I'm from that place. So I know people in that situation. So this is cool. Like this, what we put together is cool, but what is the smallest unit of this that can work? So when someone's on the street and like, yo, I don't have any time, can you say this only takes 5 minutes? This only takes 10 minutes. Can that 10 minutes grow to 10 days? I don't know. But I think that we are not thinking small enough. I almost feel like we've gone in the direction where we're thinking about world-changing ideas, which is great. I think that's half of the work. Half of the work is you figuring out how beautiful the sky looks, right? And then the second part is figuring out, like, how does this work in the soil? Like, what is the smallest plot of land that we have, and how can something grow from this plot of land? So I feel like those who are interested in social activism and all that kind of stuff, I feel like we are doing a great job with half of the work. But the second half of the work, which is the demonstration in very small cases, I personally haven't seen a lot of.
So let's move forward then with this, understanding that you absolutely know how to take people with you, right? And I know Brent to some extent, and I think I told you I worked as a governor in one of the schools there.
Right.
What school? And Capital City Academy.
Oh wow, yeah. So Nabil, the guy that I spoke about, he went to Capital City.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
What years?
No, I was a school governor, so I was never teaching there.
Right.
And just between, well, I don't know if I can say this, but I was frustrated with the educational establishment, and how it needs to be obeyed. When you're working within a school, there's only so much you can do to really properly educate a young person.
Yeah.
You can do what is required for the system.
Yeah.
And the best you end up doing is really introducing people to the lowest rung of the ladder.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have to climb their way up there. But do they want to? Because so often you'll get trapped on that lower rung. So, we were always trying to see how can we originate something else, and one of the reasons they're building a especially dedicated art block in that school is almost in a way of trying to start and have a new starting point for growing the lives of young people.
Yeah, and I think.
But have you? I don't know if you've ever. Anyway.
Well, no, and well, it's with what you're saying. Like that's similar to my. I mean, schools in Northwest are schools in Northwest. It's going to have a very similar like experience. So I never went to Capital City, but I went to a school near there, Wembley High. At the time, it wasn't that great. Well, now it's great, apparently. But the issue, I celebrate anyway. If I'm in East London or South London, I see someone from Northwest London who's a creative, I celebrate them because I'm like, I know how hard it is for this to happen. The reason why Authors of the Estate exists, it exists out of absence. It's not. It's a response to absence. It's not a response because we've got like tons of things going on. It's because we had nothing going on. All of our buildings and places where we can do recreational things, like they've all shut down. And so we created something to signal that something can happen here if we wanted it to. The issue is this. The issue is keeping something alive. You would have, like, if you go to any area, you're not going to have all the different types of people to create to change the world is in every council estate. All the types of people that you're going to need is there, right? The person who's like methodical, strategic, the person who's really good with money and administration, the person that's the visionary, and the person who's just on the ground doing the work. Like, all those people who need each other are in every single estate. The issue is, where do they grow? Yeah, they have their homes and they live with each other, but where is the central space that allows them to grow in and to be to not just fit a criteria of a project list, but for them or for them to get a funding grant for 1 or 2 years. But where can they be for them to generationally build power and be able to pass that down? That's not a thing unless people open up their house for that to be a thing. It gets touchy.
So when we met at Civic Square, right? And my the way I think about Civic Square is we call it a community agency network. It's a community agency, and we think about cosmo-local because we're thinking it's no longer the case that you can call anything really truly local anymore, because with the internet you can pull down solutions from the global commons. Solutions are available, right? So it's like, how do we give them traction in a certain place at a certain time? So I wonder how you think about what's happening at Civic Square and whether or not you could see, because you've been a bit involved with them, right? So I don't know the extent of your involvement with Civic Square. Yeah. But how do you see that work, which seems to be small in a sense because it's place-based. Yeah. But it is reaching out across Birmingham, obviously, which is a huge city. Yeah. But it's also reaching out cosmo-locally. I mean, Imi's work is well known in many, many places around the world. So how do you see that as being part of the context within which your estates, for example, could thrive?
I mean, I think that I almost feel like there is a new wave of community leadership. It's like community leadership 2.0. When you think about, like, when I grew up with the community leaders in the 90s, it's very much like we're bringing people together from our estate together and we're setting up trips and all that kind of stuff, which was brilliant. And I feel like now the kids who are now old enough to be community leaders are way more attuned as to how they can be local and global at the same time. And not global as far as like all over the world, but how they can have a home base, but also as well build allyship and exchange resources in surrounding areas as well. That is, I think, a type of thinking that someone like Imi, who runs Civic Square, Amara, who runs Maya Group and Yard, André Reed, who builds Kyondo, like, is very much focused on building these spaces. I'm very excited about it. I'm excited to see all the different genres of that. Do you know what I mean? Like the way Civic Square does it, the way Yard does it, they are genres of community gathering, and that is so important. Depending on the different types of areas you're going to be in, there's going to be different temperaments. Like in my area, the temperament is different. Like people are going to seem like they're very standoffish and not have time and all that kind of stuff, and are going to be interested in very different things. And I think that but I do feel like one thing that the things that Imi's doing that's very important is that not only is she building the tools and figuring it out, because remember, we're all very young, not just in age, but we're all very young as far as like us doing this work. So we have no idea the level of impact that this is going to create 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now. But the thing that I really love about her is that she's shown me, also a community leader, some really amazing tools. She open sources her tools to be like, listen, this has worked for us, and how does this work for you? And I think that's really powerful. That's not to say that like activists in the past haven't done this, but also activists in the past didn't have internet and they didn't document themselves very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like we have more resources to be able to make this longer lasting. So I think what Imi's doing is great. I'm one of Imi's biggest fans, and yeah, I think that like the level of, she's almost like an OG in this as far as like us younger like leaders, because the level of work it takes. It's very easy to be an Instagram change maker, right? You just say a couple of things, but for her to be able to deal with brick and mortar and to be able to go through the contracts and the meetings and the meetings and the more meetings and dealing with payroll and all that kind of stuff, is a level of hard power. It's a level of work that a lot of people doesn't even know exists, but she goes through it and also shares best practices too.
I mean, can you imagine as a sort of next stage, all of these kinds of forming communities that you described, and you mentioned two I don't even know, which is exciting for me, but we're involved with some that are in Mexico and in Africa and in India, which have got so many of the same qualities as what Imi's doing, that being my example over here. But also previously, you might look at things like transition towns, or the things that spun off permaculture or eco-villages. And they've all got similar kind of qualities and properties, meaning they can talk the way you're talking to some extent. I think you're bringing new language again, and the fact that you're bringing it from where you're bringing it is quite unique. So I'm loving that. But there's something in common with these others as well, that I wonder if they really were well linked to each other, that wouldn't itself be such a powerful force for the evolution of our public space, the evolution of human agency, or whatever it is we want, the creative potential of humans for, in the interest of the whole of life, planet Earth and animals and everything. Whether or not that wouldn't, be quite a period of acceleration. It might actually get you out of the workshop mentality because something else is happening now.
Well,
you wouldn't drop workshops. Somebody else though might be doing.
It serves a purpose. It serves there's a time and a place for it. It's just not every day.
Oh, they've got to keep going. So everybody's going to need workshops from now here until eternity, right? But
time and place
doesn't mean you've got to do them all the time.
I don't have to do it. I think it just makes life more fun, and I think it makes traveling more enjoyable, in terms of like it makes finding places more enjoyable. Like, so what I'm saying is not new. I'm speaking about something that was here and we don't have it anymore. So even when I'm talking about community and community gathering, I'm saying this not because it's a new thing. I'm saying it because I've grown up in communities that have deteriorated, and now I'm trying to figure out how to get it back. This isn't a future thing. It's more a remembering thing. So when we're speaking about like communities having their own voice, that's been happening from the beginning of time, right? You would have cultures that are more better with music. You have more cultures that are more better with like metal work, and some cultures are really great with like agriculture or medicine or poetry or whatever. That's their thing. And that's just what that's what friends do. When people gather together, they just find it interesting, they really go into it, and they get their little inside jokes and all that kind of stuff. How do like, the thing I'm interested in is that I want to find my tribe of people that's interested in building, in creating, forming new creative languages. That's my thing. That's what I like to do. And I imagine that if we do it at the level that we want to do it, and we can do it, then at some point, the closer you get to, just say for example, I'm in Northwest London, the closer you get to Northwest London, you're like, oh man, this is where the artists are. Do you know what I mean? Like there may be another place where that's where the coders are, because that's what they do. Or you might have one area that's focused on code and another area that's focused on code, but it's for this demographic. Do you know what I mean? All these different niches. I feel like we, as great as the internet is, we're all in the same algorithm. And what that has done is that is in a weird way, I feel bruised a lot of our uniqueness and our diversity. Our quirky interests have now kind of, I believe, have deteriorated because we serve an algorithm that kind of feeds us the same things. So we all have the same taste. And I'm really interested to see what happens when we, because that's what's happening in online spaces. I wonder what happens when we create physical space for us to redevelop our taste again.
Yeah. It's beautiful. That's great. It's a great goal to, you know, to reawaken ourselves in the place we actually are. I mean, how do you feel? How do you feel this is? How are you feeling about COVID and the fact that we were actually prevented from meeting? Did that
I mean,
you
COVID itself is horrible. Like
Yeah.
COVID itself is horrible, and Corona is not a joke. I think that I feel personally, this I can only speak for myself personally as an artist. As an artist, it deteriorated my interest in the world. Like, as far as beforehand, I feel like this is more of a thing in the West. I think it's a very Western thing. Like, you have this interest in like, we're gonna either change the world or travel the world or speak to the world or something, right?
Yeah.
Something the world. And then I feel like being in my house for so long, and staying in this physical space for so long where you had to be here, my interest kind of like went smaller into wanting greatness to wanting intimacy. Do you know what I mean? Like wanting something that was a firework that everyone saw to something that meant something. And that then shrunk my circle to my family and friends and people who's within the area. My sense of community went from there being hundreds of people, thousands of people, to them being like 12 people. And that for me was helpful because it changed how I spoke, and it allowed me to be more honest in the work that I'm doing. Because I only want this to reach 12 people, so it doesn't need to like meet everyone's needs. It helped me appreciate travel in a way that when I'm in this place, I'm in this place, and I'm not here because I'm trying to tell my friends I'm here. Do you know what I mean? This isn't an Instagrammable moment. I like to be present in this different place. So it made me more physical, basically. It made me more physical, more honest, more grounded. Obviously, the whole coronavirus virus thing is humbling in and of itself. But I think like I'm way more interested in physical matter and tangible things than I ever have been before. Because beforehand, everything is content, right? Everything is content and very esoteric and all that kind of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then you lose your sense of the fact that you're a body on a spinning planet.
So it was progress. So ironically, you know, an interview like this, my intention, you know, is Well, first of all, what I love about Zoom is that I do feel as if I'm in a conversation with you.
Yeah.
That didn't happen before COVID. No, I mean, it did. We were all on, some of us were on Zoom before that, but it really intensified over this COVID period when there was no choice but to talk to people like this.
Yeah.
And it's quite an amazing tool for that. And I think of that as evolution. But I can't hide the fact that, I can't wait to share this with people, because I imagine they will be inspired by it.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to be inspired, and they're going to maybe copy what you're doing. And, that can only be a good thing. But the beauty of it, it's almost like a koan, isn't it? It's like the two things are not two, but not two.
Yeah.
If you hadn't gone to this new way of being really yourself in an intimate way, then what you could then awaken in others would not be what you're now able to awaken in others, because as you say, it's so much more honest and real and intimate and unambitious for itself. But then that's the beauty, let's say, of life, is that the unexpected results, actually.
Yeah. I also think that personally, it's scarier to just be simple, and it's scarier to be honest, because it's so bare bone, and you can't distract any further than that. So being someone who wants to always see change, it's very easy for me to think, oh, I need to read these books to be more clued up. I need to speak to these people. I need to I don't need, if I say, oh, I want to reach 12 people, that's too little. I need to reach 12,000 people by the end of the 3-year period. And I need to make it extravagant. But there was this quote that about George Orwell, when he was talking about political language, when he said, when someone's using too complicated language, they're often trying to hide something. And if someone's honest goal is to reach 12,000 or 12 million people, then that's great. But I find a habit of mine is to convolute something because you don't feel like what you originally have is enough. And I think the purity of you being able to do the thing that you want to see in the world without whether or not it's congratulated or not is almost a superpower that I don't yet acquire, but I think it's something that I admire in a lot of serious change makers. And I think that is something that I had to definitely come across in this pandemic, whereby the thing that I'm doing is not a hard skill. It's not plumbing. It's not carpentry, but it's not like, I'm not a mechanic. I'm not building something. It's not physical like that. It's cultural. It's a feeling. It's a sensation. And I had to really ask myself, all right, what do you really want to do with this? Because you're now living in a world that might not fund this anymore. They might not even want to do this anymore. So why does this have to exist? And once you get to why it has to exist, then it makes me realize that it doesn't have to reach as much people as my ego wants it to. And that's all right.
And so another huge set of questions, which I think we might have to save for the next interview.
I mean, the thing is, I could keep going. My schedule's fine. So if you want to keep going, that's cool.
I'm just gonna ask a few quick questions. One of the reasons I will bring it to an end is because I'm sure anybody listening has got a limit to how much they can take on board, and I feel as if there's so much already that's on offer. But let me just throw two questions in, because I imagine that if people go to your website, that they will be able to see more of what you do. So you've described working as you did in the estates, but the website will describe more of entry points into the work that you do that people can follow up. So let's allow that.
Yeah.
But just to return to the early question of how is this a new politics?
Mhm.
And alongside that, for me, we sort of have to answer the question, what is the economy that arises from it? Because while you're right, I agree and I understand that it may not get funded, or you may not be able to do this in the numbers that you imagine.
Mm.
I'm a firm believer that we can give rise to a new economy through this kind of work. And I just wonder if you've had any hints of that. It might be, I mean, the most simple thing would be that you're generating things that can be bought, by people within a community.
Mm.
It might be to do with new kinds of currencies that are coming into the picture anyway. But it might be anything. I mean, you might have thought about this, or you might not have thought about it.
Mm.
But I imagine that
Oh, I
with
mean,
the
I
young
feel like
people,
I
they
wish
need some answer to that in some way.
yeah, I wish I had the answers if I'm honest with you. Like the last authors of the essay that we done, the goal what we done is that we gave every author like their own individual code where they could get, like, they could sell the books and get 100% of the profits.
Mm.
They
That's
all had
great.
jobs. So the incentive for them to do it wasn't necessarily high. But then when you think about there's some services where you can build economies around well, and I think that there's some that is a little bit more of a struggle, unless the thing that I was there are some cultures that would uh put money into a pot, and it somewhat ends up being a tax that then funds the artist, a family of artists that ends up being like the cultural leaders of that like village or tribe or whatever. So those models exist in other places. Um, the but figuring out how to do it in a way that our artists work, whereby anyone can be an artist. Do you know what I mean? Figuring out how to do it where like one individual can like release songs and feel confident that their community is gonna support them, and they can make a living off of it. I don't know. I don't know how that. I don't know how that works with the types of artists that we have, compared to when you would have a family of people who are like, your role in life is to remember the history of your people, and you write the griot, right? Like write songs about your culture and all that kind of stuff. This is what you do. This is why you're here, rather than, I make 1 or 2 songs on the side, which everyone should have the freedom to do. I personally don't know. I don't know how you can sustain it, but in terms of like things to do with like farming and or even just services like hairdressers, all that kind of stuff, like there's things that can work, but again, that still needs space. That still needs the upfront costs for those types of things to exist, I think.
Yeah. So that's, there are other ideas around that, and I'm going to share some of them when I share this amongst the other CANs. It's what we call CANs, Citizens Action Networks or Community Agency Networks. And I think that's a very fertile space, because ultimately, I think what we're trying to do, and I know that Imi feels the same, is not to rely on people doing this creative work as a volunteer activity that they will always think about as the extra thing that they can hardly able to do, that somehow they can move their life into that space at some point in some way.
Yeah.
More of that, because people working together to help each other get their needs met is an economy.
Yeah.
And it's a worthwhile way to live.
Yeah.
So let's see where that goes next.
But I feel like it's just with that, it's not just the infrastructural change that have to be made, but also the philosophical changes that have to be made. Like it's all I know is individualism. So and I've had to learn like being part of a community. That's something that was learned, something I desire, but what didn't have in front of me. So I think that like for someone to say, this is not my money, this is our money, or this is not my food, this is our food, it's something that was actually quite normal 50 years ago in the UK. But now a whole generation, that's a foreign language, so you have to learn that language.
And that in a way is almost the answer to the final, you know, and again, I'm not asking you to say anything definitive, you know, but what you've just described there for me is a new kind of politics. Right. But where does the word politics fit into your view of this? You know,
well, it's big. So when you say politics, what do you mean?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to move away from is party politics. You know, the idea that power can only be expressed by voting for a party that takes power.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas I think what you've been describing for the past hour is people developing their own power with each other. So community power, the power to be able to thrive a little bit more, you know, and to flourish a little bit more. So that's just a different kind of politics as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It still needs governance in some way, you know, going back to you saying that for you to be able to signal that you are running an educational system means you call yourself a headmaster. That's in a new system, right? In which you know, education is thought of differently. So power within this growing new system of that you're building a language for, you know, maybe doesn't have politics at all of the same kind, but it still will have some form of power.
What I'm doing is it ends up being political. My real genuine focus is climate. That's what I care about. I care about not climate in terms of climate change, but it's like what we do creates temperature within places. So the same way how you if you're speaking with a friend and it's ice cold, it affects your conversation, it affects what you're talking about, it affects how long you talk for. You're talking but you actually just want to go home as quickly as possible. If it's raining, kind of the same thing. If you're dealing with a summer's day, it prolongs what you're speaking about, it adds new flavor to what you're saying, it encourages you to explore a little bit more, and it also is what it allows you to stay longer. You could be there for hours, even when it's nighttime. It's a different type of nighttime, right? Like you feel like it's 11, but we can still hang out and talk. But equally, if it's too hot, you don't want to talk to no one, and actually it gets a bit violent sometimes. So it's like that I'm trying to create the type of culture that sets a temperature for things to happen, like politically or whatever. Like as far as like the nuts and bolts as to what needs to happen, like what needs to change and all that kind of stuff is not necessarily something that I'm majorly interested in. But I am interested in creating a type of environment where people want to go to talk. And I think making art and encouraging people to become artists is the part that I play in that.
Andre, I've just totally enjoyed this last hour talking with you, and I can sense we'll have a follow-up. But actually, you've said so much, and I'm going to, if you don't object, I will be sharing it with other people.
Yeah, sure.
But you've given such a holistic view, really, you know, of change that's already occurring in our conversation, and it must be occurring with the people that you're working with. And I really welcome that. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been it's been good.